Have you ever really stopped to think about how the United States got so big? I mean, it went from this tiny collection of states on the East Coast to the massive country we know today. In just a matter of decades, it went through one of the most incredible and fastest expansions in history. So let's get into it. This is the story of that transformation.
To really wrap your head around the scale of this, just look at these numbers. Back in 1800, the US was this small nation, right? Just 5.3 million people, 16 states, and it was basically penned in between the Atlantic Ocean and the Appalachian Mountains. Anything past that was pretty much a huge, unknown wilderness. Now, compare that to today. A nation of over 330 million people stretching from coast to coast. So how on earth did we get from there to here?
Well, the push west wasn't just one big event. It really started trickling out almost as soon as the country was founded. Let's take a look at the very first steps that set this whole massive change in motion.
You can see how fast the dominoes started to fall. First, the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Bam! The U.S. borders now stretched all the way to the Mississippi River. Then you have pioneers, guys like Daniel Boone, who literally carved paths through the mountains, opening the door to the frontier. The government wasn't far behind. They passed the Northwest Ordinance, which was a super important law that set up a process for turning territories into actual states. And that's what paved the way for Kentucky and Tennessee to join the club. The slow trickle west had officially begun.
And then came the real game changer. For just $15 million, which was a steal even back then, Napoleon's France sold its huge chunk of North American territory to the United States. This was the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. And with just the stroke of a pen, the size of the country literally doubled overnight. Its potential now stretched all the way to the Rocky Mountains.
So, you have all this new land, but what's actually out there? Nobody really knew. To find out, President Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark on their now famous expedition. Their incredible journey all the way to the Pacific Ocean and back didn't just put the area on a map, it lit a fire in the American imagination. This dream of a nation that could stretch from sea to shining sea.
And that dream? Well, it soon grew into a powerful, almost unstoppable ideology, an idea that would fuel the next and much more aggressive phase of expansion, and one that came with some really profound and difficult consequences.
This idea was called manifest destiny. It was this widespread belief that the United States wasn't just able, but was divinely destined to expand all the way across the continent. And this wasn't just a land grab in their eyes, it was seen as a mission to spread American democracy and ideals. It became the core justification for everything that was about to happen.
But this destiny came at a devastating cost to the people who were already living on that land. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. This law basically tore up all previous treaties and ordered 5 major Native American nations in the Southeast, the Cherokee, Muskogee, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw, to be forcibly removed from the lands their ancestors had lived on for centuries.
The result was the tragic event we now know as the Trail of Tears. Tens of thousands of men, women, and children were forced to march hundreds of miles west under absolutely horrific conditions. Thousands died from disease, starvation, and exposure along the way. It's a brutal part of this story and a reminder that the expansion driven by manifest destiny came at an immense and tragic human cost.
Okay, so let's jump forward to the 1840s, because this is the decade where that slow trickle west turns into an absolute flood. And it was all driven by a war and one incredible discovery.
The 1840s were just a whirlwind. It kicked off in 1845 with the U.S. annexing Texas, which led straight into the Mexican-American War. After the U.S. won, the two countries signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And what that did was force Mexico to give up a massive piece of territory, what is now California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of several other states. And then, with the most incredible timing you could imagine, gold was discovered in that exact same territory.
The news about gold was like lighting a match. It just electrified the entire world. All of a sudden, tens of thousands of people, they got the nickname the 49ers, dropped everything they were doing and raced to California. They came by wagon, they came by ship, all of them chasing the dream of striking it rich.
The sheer scale of this rush is just mind-boggling. By the mid-1850s, something like 300,000 people had poured into California. This huge, sudden population boom was unlike anything the country had ever seen.
It transformed the region almost overnight and put California on the fast track to becoming a state in 1850. So you've got all this new land and all these new people. But how do you actually build the West? How do you forge a new society from scratch? Well, this next phase is all about the diverse groups of people and the amazing new technologies that made it all happen.
You know, the people who built the West weren't just one homogeneous group. It was this incredible melting pot. You had European immigrants, especially from Ireland and Germany, looking for cheap land and a new life. You had Mormons, escaping religious persecution, who went on to found Salt Lake City. Chinese migrants came and provided crucial labor, especially for building the railroads. And after the Civil War, thousands of African Americans headed west, finding new opportunities and becoming the iconic cowboys we think of today. And if there was one piece of technology that unlocked the West, it was this, the Transcontinental Railroad. It was a massive, monumental project. You had two companies, the Union Pacific building west from Nebraska and the Central Pacific building east from California, in a race to connect the country. They finally met in the middle, in Utah, in 1869, driving a golden spike that physically stitched the nation together.
And the difference it made was just astounding. Before the railroad, if you wanted to go cross-country, you were looking at a 6-month, agonizing journey by wagon train. After it was finished, that same trip took about a week. It completely revolutionized travel, communication, and business, and truly tied the West to the rest of the country.
But with all this rapid growth and all this wealth moving around, you can bet that law and order was, well, hard to find. The huge open spaces and brand new towns made the West really hard to police, which is how we get the legends of the Wild West. You had famous outlaws like Jesse James robbing those new trains and banks, and then you had legendary lawmen like Wyatt Earp who were trying to bring some kind of order to all the chaos.
But an era like that can't last forever. As we get into the late 19th century, we start to see the final major conflicts and what became known as the official closing of the American frontier.
As settlers and the U.S. military pushed deeper into the last remaining territories, the last independent Native American nations fought back fiercely to protect their lands and their way of life. Leaders like Sitting Bull of the Sioux and Geronimo of the Apache led a very determined resistance. In the end, though, the overwhelming military and technological advantage of the United States led to their defeat and their forced relocation onto reservations.
With the end of those major conflicts, the political map of the country we know today really started to solidify. The last territories on the mainland, Oklahoma, then New Mexico, and Arizona, all became states in the early 1900s. And then much later, in 1959, Alaska and Hawaii officially joined, completing the 50 states that we have today.
So by the time the 20th century dawned, that was pretty much it. The chapter was closed. The vast, open, wild frontier that had defined America for a century was, for all intents and purposes, gone. It had been transformed by railroads, settled by millions of people, and brought fully under the control of the federal government. The untamed West was now a part of the United States.
And that really brings us to the final big question. The physical frontier might be gone, but the process of expanding across it shaped America's economy, its culture, and its whole sense of identity in ways we still feel every day. It created unbelievable opportunities and incredible wealth, but it also caused profound tragedy and displacement. So what is the true, lasting legacy of this complex and defining American story?